Hi, welcome to my channel. My name's Ian and I have been a referee for a number of different role-playing games for more years than I care to mention. I've refereed on official tournaments, at conventions and ad hoc games for beginners and veterans alike. And I've taken part and reassembled the nuts and bolts of many game systems and editions. So with all that in mind, I would like to run you through what I consider to be some of my top tools that help to make a referee's life a bit easier and a bit more rounded, and their games richer, especially in the effort of world building. I'm not going to delve into obvious ones such as game core rules or reference screens, play aids and dice, miniatures, battle mats, all of that, which are just, you know, a given. Those are generally ubiquitous to anything and will by and large depend on the game system that you are running. Instead, what I'm going to try to do here, I'll focus on more on tools that I use away from the table for campaign building and organisation, and helping to fire your imagination ready to meet the players around your gaming space. Tools useful to a broad selection of games are the order of the day here, regardless of genre or specific systems. Note that none of the publishers of any of the things that I'm about to mention are sponsors in any shape or form. So having said that, and without further ado, and with the note that these are in no particular order, and it's not a complete list of things that I think should be in a game master's arsenal, or a referee's arsenal, or whatever you want to call it, but here are some of my top picks and essentials, things that I use a lot. First up, two books, and this will give you a kind of taster of the way this list is going to be assembled. So the first up are the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Guide, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and Rolemaster Standard System Games Master's Law. Now, refereeing a role-playing game is not the easiest job to do. Refereeing a single pre-written adventure parceled up in a nice shiny book with everything that you need is a bit easier, but it's still not the simplest way to engage with this particular corner of the gaming medium. So two things that referees can get a lot of mileage from when they're creating and running a campaign are pretty fundamental: advice and tools. Now, many things on this particular list come down into the tool camp. With these two books, they plant themselves firmly into both. The first edition Dungeon Master's Guide is a behemoth of the gaming industry. It may be, by page counts, comparable to the current crop of core Dungeons and Dragons books, but with less art and smaller font sizes, the first edition DMG is dense. Right from the get-go, it delves into the whys of the game. Why do we use six-sided dice to generate ability scores? It goes into probability distributions. And there are very few role-playing game books that break down the mechanical reasoning in this way. You get a lot of these are the rules, but not generally why the rules are the way they are. And the Dungeon Master's Guide does a lot of that, the under the hood explanation of things. Beyond that, each chapter reveals new nuggets of advice useful for any role-playing game. If you strip away the specifics, the specific rules and things that are aligned towards Dungeons and Dragons, then you just find just a ton of stuff. How to build campaigns, how to control player expectations, how to add colour to your descriptions of the areas that player characters explore, all sorts of stuff. The Rolemaster Games Master Law book released initially for the Rollmaster Standard system, later then repackaged for the Rollmaster Fantasy role-playing game, is another one of those fantastic referee-centric books that's applicable to any role-playing game. It's split into two parts and an appendix. The first part, called Intangibles, Philosophies of Role-Playing, big title. It's the most broadly useful section to everyone. It covers advice on dealing with players as people, how to encourage participation in the game by everyone, and the general dynamics of people sat around the table. It offers advice and a structured approach to campaign design, using story to progress and build an immersion through the player characters. Advice on structuring sessions can be a referee sanity saver, and some of the useful notes about tournaments and online play round it out. And bearing in mind, it's online play before we had a resurgence for some reason in playing online over 2020. The second part, Tangibles, which deals mostly with Rollmaster mechanics. It provides notes on building game elements for the Rollmaster building blocks and mechanical methods to handle character and campaign activities. This section is more refined towards Rollmaster, but still contains many useful tools that can be used with most games. Rollmaster continues to be one of those games where you can pluck bits and pieces out of it to enhance whatever game you're playing. Some of the systems are very generic and just give useful results. The appendices cover the use of music and further tools for fine-honing any game, plus some Rollmaster tools and options. Taken as a pair, these two volumes, they offer a diving pool for reference, to dive in and out of for helpful advice and the odd useful tool. Second, any campaign setting book, or the core campaign setting book. Literally any. Let's clarify by any that generally reflects the level of detail that you find useful for your games. Now why? Because it's a good template to crib from, and it goes a long way into helping you structure your own thoughts and your own material to help players visualize your world and to keep you organized for it. My go-to of choice back in the early 80s was modelling my campaign material on on these two fine books from the World of Greyhawk box set. Later things have become more detailed and so on, so I've kind of left the skeleton templates provided by these behind, but as a starting point, really useful, good template to follow. If you look at every campaign setting now, they all crib from somewhere. Most follow broadly the same format, usually introducing the world elements from a macro scale down. Most place easy and clear markers on what is setting and what is game material. This doesn't need to be specifically a setting that you want to play, although that will save you a lot of work if you need it saving. What's really interested here is a method of standing on the shoulders of giants, a tool for seeing how other authors and creators have managed the task of presenting a world, so that we might take that skeleton of their work and apply flesh of our own making. I don't necessarily mean just copy their headings. To be really useful, do a deep dive into the work and keep asking yourself, why? Why did the designer put this element in? Why is that city there? Why is the arrangement of regions and nations in this way? Why does the author describe currency here and not later on? Is it information needed to properly understand a following section? Why is a powerful question. If you can analyse another setting and answer the whys, then you are well on the road to being able to logically address them for your own constructions. Next one I've selected is is this. It was first published as a booklet. Excuse me, it's really hot in here, and the whole room smells of primer. It was originally published by an indie publisher called Midkemia Press, who still sell a set of a revised edition of this, along with other products as PDFs today from their website. I'll put a link to them in the description. Obviously, like I said at the beginning, not a sponsor. And Chaosium produced versions of it, both under the RuneQuest banner, as in RuneQuest Cities, and just under the generic Cities title. Cities has been the staple of my campaign for my campaign construction toolbox for a long time. It provides advice and procedures to produce towns and cities and villages, to populate them, to determine how much, even how much space around the city that you should allocate or leave for things like agricultural land, enough to be able to feed the population, for example. Some of the processes can take a little bit of getting used to, especially, I think I was 10 when I first started using this to throw things together, and I can remember finding it a little bit of a, what the hell is going on here at that time. But once you figured it out, and once you're away, then it's really a godsend of a thing if you for adding and populating cities and towns. Again, this is more suitable for medieval, possibly like Bronze Age stuff, and a lot of RuneQuest is Bronze Age in base. Not so useful for modern day, and certainly for science fiction, but it's still a useful tool to start from. Some of the advice in here about general positioning of settlements and stuff, for example, are useful regardless of what genre you're going, but mainly useful for ancient and medieval stuff. There is advice in here for different cultural positions, for example, when you're calculating number of buildings from populations, where you're talking about the number of people that might be inhabiting a particular dwelling or whatever. You know, there was a lot. It's a very thin book, but there's a heck of a lot in it. So yeah, you can use this to produce some pretty believable settings in a relatively short space of time. Now, alongside Cities, Midkemia also published more other PDFs that were picked up by Chaosium again in the day. For example, Kars, Jonril, and Tulan of the Isles. Now, all of these are rough examples of the sort of thing that you can produce, the sort of detail that you can produce just by following the procedures in this book. There's also a handy catch-up, a bunch of catch-up tables which are really useful, and encounters and so on. The catch-up tables are really good where you've got like gaps, this section here, where you've got gaps between adventures, and you want the characters to actually interact, even if it is on an off the table, sort of off the screen type way, but actually to build them up. Because one of the points of this book, and one of the points of a really good campaign setting, is that things aren't static. Things do carry on and happen even though the player characters aren't on screen or on table actually there. Otherwise what you end up with is this sort of freeze frame thing. As soon as the player characters leave the gates of the city, then everyone in the city does this until the characters wander back through the city and pick up, and everything is exactly the same as it was when they left. Well, you know, that makes for a pretty boring setting. So yeah, RuneQuest Cities, or Cities, still available from Midkemia Press, and there's not much in the way of difference between the different editions, but either a version of the Chaosium, like the Cities or RuneQuest Cities, or the current Midkemia version will stand you in good stead if you want to go in that direction. The next one might be a little bit off the wall for some of you, but bear with. One of the things that preserves a sense of immersion in campaign settings is language. This doesn't necessarily mean creating your own languages, although it can, but ensuring that there is at least some consistency to the way that words are formed and sound. This goes for place names and character names. I live in a country where you can tell from which of the patchwork of cultures a particular place name originated from simply by understanding a few basic rules. For example, a place name ending in ton, like Northampton or Southampton or whatever, is likely an old Anglo-Saxon town. A town name ending in by or b, as in Selby, is likely an old Norse village, and something ending in Chester or Cester, like Toaster, Bicester, Cirencester, whatever, is likely started life as a Roman camp, for example. A thorp was a Norse farmstead, and so on. If you can construct that kind of thing, or that kind of cohesiveness into your setting, not only does it make the naming of places and things a lot easier because you've given yourself a set of structured rules to go by, but it also makes the whole setting a lot believable. The language construction kit, which is I think quite available from Amazon, is a guide to building and evolving languages. You can dive into it full scale and develop one or more unique languages for your setting, or you can use it as its broader advice to delve into some basic building blocks for common place names, common name prefixes and suffixes and something like that. If you just come up with a few distinct words for things like ford, village, town, forest, and so on, then by combining these prefixes and suffixes that you've got a coherent list of, then coming up with a name for a place, it just becomes dead easy and sounds like it belongs to the rest of the setting. There's so many settings where you've got, a village over there from country X that's got a particular name, and then the same another village further down the river or whatever, also in country X, sounds like it was made up from some other set of linguistic rules, some other culture. They don't feel like they belong. There's a lot of the patchwork type campaign settings that this especially is true for. And things like the Forgotten Realms, although in certain areas of the Forgotten Realms they do follow some of this sort of level of cultural rules. The Mystara, for example, that is a complete mishmash of all sorts of things and so on. So it's a really useful thing to follow. Language construction kit, dive into it in depth, or just take the surface advice and come up with something coherent. It is also a bit kind of annoying where you've created this immersive language or a general sort of theme to the languages that you want, and then someone just comes up with Fred the Barbarian or think they're being clever by putting something together in Latin where Latin breaks the immersion. So if you do come up with these rules as well, try and give your players just a simple sheet. I mean, you've seen them in various role-playing games where you've got example names. Do one of those using your rules, however in-depth you are, just to give to the players and say, here are some basic ideas for naming your character that will fit in with the setting. So yeah, and creating languages, creating languages can become a hobby on its own. If you know anything about Tolkien, that's one of the things that he did through like Sindarin, and he evolved part of the creation of Middle-earth process. I don't mean like I mean the actual writing process behind Middle-earth. Was about evolving those languages and evolving Middle-earth around those languages to see how those languages might develop. You don't have to do that. You don't have to go to that level. This book will show you how to evolve languages without a huge amount of world detailing, but you can go down that. I mean, if you end up with a world as detailed as Middle Earth, then nothing wrong with that, is there? So yeah, it's a nice bit of gloss. Helps your players out by giving them coherent rules for naming their characters. Helps you out by giving you coherent rules, a menu of naming conventions, if you like, for naming places. Really useful thing to do. So yeah, language construction kit. Next up, mapping. Mapping tools. It doesn't matter what you use as long as you can produce maps. This is a bit of a bugbear of mine, to be honest. Some of the maps that you get with some role-playing games, and this is not me griping at new role-playing games, because some games from way back suffered from this same thing. If you are going to have a map, that map has to be useful. It has to be a reference tool for the referee to be able to use that in a meaningful way to convey what's going on to the players. If your map looks pretty but tells you nothing, or even worse, you know, if the scaling is random, or if it's just not readable, if you put all sorts of nice shading and hatching and stuff all over the place that actually make the boundaries, obscure the boundaries of the map, then what you've done is produced a useless map. And in modern products, it's become vogue to make great artworks of maps, and they're fantastically pretty to look at. Sometimes they're useful. I think in modern days, I find like 1 in 10 maps actually useful for doing anything with. So when you've got the liberty to actually create your own setting, make sure that your maps that you are producing are useful to you. Now, there are 2 methods that I use for mapping. Sorry, 3 methods. First method is by hand, and by hand I find these. I've got a number of these books. They're really good. The Albatross series of stuff. They're available for print on demand from Lulu. Everything goes crash. Right, so they come in all sorts of different styles. So this has got what they call a regional map. And then they break those down into all sorts of different things. This particular one has got isographic hexes. So you break down the region and then pick up the hexes from those regions, transfer them onto the isometrics to produce a sort of 3-dimensional view of things. These ones are more, so what you have again your regional maps at the front of these, and then it goes down into breakdown of hexes, and then the ones I use most often, like I said, is these things. I have several volumes of those. This is one which you have a regional map at the beginning, or in this case more than one regional map for reference. And then what I tend to do is I letter and number the grid, and then we have the actual maps themselves referenced by their grid section as you expand them out. So we go for these kingdom sized maps, and then each square within there, that you can't see, but breaks down into a region map, and excuse me, and so on. So I have a number of those, and then from there, for areas that I want in more detail, and because I kind of grew up with Judges Guild campaign settings, we then transfer those smaller hexes from those books into large campaign areas, and then I either scan them in or do something, or use the use those directly and draw things up in an application called Campaign Cartographer. Now, Campaign Cartographer is one of those, is a digital mapping software. One of many. There are a number of online ones. There are a number of application ones. Some are better supported than others. I found Campaign Cartographer is one of the best ones because it has a CAD basis to it. So instead of relying on tiles, there's one that keeps cropping up in my feed at the moment in various social media that's advertising this ultimate bring your dungeon imaginations to life, and all I can see is, yeah, this is just geomorphs, and I moved away from geomorphs many moons ago because you just don't get what's in your mind. Geomorphs are quick and easy, but they are, you know, just I don't know. I'm not a fan. And these systems that try and advertise themselves as being some fantastic map builders when all they're really doing is using geomorphic tiles is, I think, a bit of a swizz. Be that as it may, geomorphs do have their place. I mean, you can actually slap down something really quickly if you just want a bit of a fun. But then again, you may as well play a board game if you're doing that, tile-based stuff. Which is, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of dungeon exploration board games that I enjoy that have a tile-based system. I just believe that role-playing should be a bit more. So that's two. So, you know, drawing things by hand and drawing things on the computer. That's two of them. And if you have any favourite mapping tools, then by all means go and tell me about them and tell everyone else about them in the comments, because I think that's one of the things where it's useful to share, because there are so many of them that are appearing over time. Some really good fractal generators that will, you know, create a town or an island or a continent or whatever in relatively short time. Some that are a bit more detailed that allow you to actually draw your own coastlines out and things like that. Others, like Campaign Cartographer, that you can even get into macro scripting and so on to produce things, and can almost use them like a GIS system. That's a geographical information system. So, especially those that deal in layers. One of the reasons why I use Campaign Cartographer is because it's separated things out into layers. And also allows you to interrogate those layers. So you can search for text in there. You can also, if you want to know the area of a kingdom, if you've drawn the boundary to the kingdom as a polygon, you can then just go and say, well, what's the area of that polygon? So you can actually use all of that. And because it's scripted as well, you can actually tie those scripts into databases and things. And going the other way, you know, I've created little applications that take the old Traveller sector files, turn them into a drawing script for for Campaign Cartographer, and then run that script within Campaign Cartographer to draw me a whole Traveller sector in seconds. So there's a lot you can do with something like Campaign Cartographer. People say it's got a steep learning curve, but I'll defy that. So that's it. So digital mapping and physical mapping. The final one that not a lot of gamers consider for some reason, but if you've got something like Google Maps, well, everyone's got Google Maps. It's on everything. Or if you go into things a little bit further with something like in the UK, we have Ordnance Survey who do a lot of the mapping, leisure mapping and road mapping, travel mapping, hiking mapping, all sorts of mapping. But they have an online service, it's a subscription service called OS Maps, and I find that great for modern days. Most of my Call of Cthulhu campaigns take place in the modern day because I feel players have got more connection to the modern day than they do to, say, the 1920s or 1950s or whatever. And that connection then allows you to build on more directly on things that they know. And in terms of that, using OS maps to create custom real life maps of the areas that the characters were using or exploring, or the scenario was taking place in, gives them an even more connection, because you're using a mapping tool from the real world to depict this thing that they're exploring. So things like Google Maps and OS Maps and various other, I think USGS probably has a ton of stuff like that as well. The digital mapping, real life, or even, well, when you talk about, you know, I have all sorts of real world maps that I refer to all the time in various things. So it's real life mapping in a wholesale, whether it's online or whether it's in paper, physical form or whatever. It's not a source to overlook. For science fiction, for modern day, and even for medieval and so on, that map I just held up was an overlay of Roman sites within Britain. And so, you know, picking on that, you know, mapping sources for medieval force. I've got books of maps of illustrations of old medieval maps, and that's really useful as well, because they were a practical in their art, medieval art of cartography. They did have practical illustrations of what they were trying to portray with that map. So it's a useful tools to have. So real world maps. So what we've got: draw your own with pencil and pen. Draw them with digital tool, and using real world map sources. So maps, important things. Oh, and just these things are really useful. I find they are. They're published by Square Hex, same company that does the large hex sheets that I use. But what they do, they come with a blank, couple of blank large hexes. They really do sort of follow the form that Judges Guild used to have. Some blank pages, or lined pages for scribbling, some squared paper, and some larger square paper and smaller hex excerpts and so on. So you can use these things to actually put a whole sort of campaign area. I do it quite often. Have I got any lying around at the moment? I do it quite often. When I've got a campaign area I want to detail, I'll extract the section from my other mapping sources and draw it out onto there, and then towns and cities and areas of interest obviously go into there. So they're really good. They're from Square Hex. These things are also handy as well. Ugh. So these little kind of module books, again from Square Hex, and what you've got is something to produce your cover with, little hex map, squared map, more lined paper, lots of stuff for knocking up scenario ideas. You know, they've got a few squared things to go through. They're not very long, they're not very big, that's all they are, sort of A5 shape, but they're about the same length. If any of you are familiar with the Traveller Adventure booklets, they're about the same length as a single adventure from the double adventure books. Maybe 16 to 20 pages, not sure. But they're a really useful thing to, you know, sitting down, scribbling out ideas and so on. So mapping and scribbling and stuff like that, Square Hex is a really good source. I'll put a link in below to them. I'll also put a link into the Albatross books as well, so you've got a reference to those as well, if they float your boat, and you'll find them useful. All I can say is that I do. So next up, yes, we touched on earlier about coming up with a coherent linguistic system that will help you and your players come up with names and things for things. Another useful source is a dictionary of names. This one is It's RPG Realms, but it used to be done by Judges Guild, I think. I just PDF version of it that I bought ages ago and printed out and used it quite a lot. Yeah, as I said, the Treasury of Archaic Names, originally produced by Judges Guild, I think still available from Judges Guild, from DriveThru. This particular version was published by Quicklink back in 2001. Okay, so it's battered old PDF, but there is it's a handy thing. It's a handy thing to touch in, good reference. I also use this. Now these things, dictionaries of first names, you can find all over the place. There are lots of them, and the best ones are the ones that actually give you, like in this case, that give you the etymology and the meaning behind names. Because alongside your language construction kit, you can use a dictionary of names to sort of use them in concert with each other to come up with things, useful stuff. So yeah, very highly useful thing. The Treasury of Archaic Names has got all sorts of stuff in it that's useful. Actually, you know, going back again to the language construction kit, we talked about things like if you come up with names for common components, we've got things like this table on the back, and there are a number of tables that are similar all the way through. You know, there we go. Here's a making up names section. Now, in that section, there's a lot of components where you've got, you know, letters and stuff like that, and then you've got a lot of suffixes and things like this. So if you come up with a coherent thing for your naming conventions, you can plug things in like this. You could recreate these tables but using your own suffixes and prefixes to come through, and where you've got all of these you know, like names of objects and names of geographical features and so on, you could almost reproduce this book by replacing the table names or the names in the tables with words that you have generated using words that you have created for your language or languages from your setting. So it's a really handy book to have for a number of reasons. Again, it looks all fantasy and everything on the front, but it really is useful to any modern fantasy, medieval, science fiction, whatever. Really handy book. So the Treasury of Archaic Names in particular, but also Dictionary of Names, really handy. Next, a campaign journal. Now, there are lots and lots of campaign journals. The basic idea of a campaign journal is simply a book that you write stuff into as you develop the campaign. Whether it's ideas that you come up with on your own and you think, oh, spark of inspiration, I'm going to scribble something down, or whether it's actually at the table where you've got a bunch of players, they come across a pub, you haven't quite got round to inventing the pub name, so you invent the name of the pub off the fly. You need to have somewhere where you can write down that name so that next time they come back to that pub, oh, well, aren't batteries fun? Right, so what we're talking about, pub names, right, so player characters walk into a pub, you don't know what the pub's called, you call it a particular name. They go back to the same pub. Now that pub, like we said before about a campaign evolving behind the scenes away from the player characters, that pub might not be called that anymore, but people aren't going to forget that it was called whatever you invented on the day. So something to note, things like that, jot the things down as you're going along. And it can be anything. I mean, back in the day, there was the Dungeon Master's Adventure Log, something like that. It's in one of the boxes down there, my old copy of that, but I haven't used it in years because I use I use this, which has just got all sorts of wonderful scribblings and things as we go, as we play, and also just bunches of notes. Also, when the players are doing silly things. Paizo came out with these little handy things a while back, and they don't seem to do them anymore, which is a shame really, because these things are actually really handy. I found lots of different sections, so you've got a registry of player characters at the front, so that if Joe doesn't turn up, then you can always figure it through. A sort of section for scribbling down rulings, house rules and things. Then a calendar of events, which is also handy. One of the things that I think is often overlooked is time logging, and then the bulk of it is just these part line, part squared paper for recording game sessions, and that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about, where you actually go and scribble down, oh, this pub was called this, and sketch a little map out of it, or whatever you decided to do. And then at the back you've got some NPC stuff and general stuff. These are actually really useful, these item cards. So where the players pick stuff up that they haven't actually figured out yet and they don't know what it is, you can actually give it a code and give the players a code. That item has got this particular code. So when you've actually figured out what it is, you tell me the code and I can tell you. Look it up in my book as what it actually was, rather than having to go back to the adventure and read it from there. So yeah, those things really useful. Unfortunately not sold. I wish, even if these things didn't actually sell very well, which is why they don't do them anymore or what, I don't know, but it would be really nice if Paizo had actually gone and released the PDFs for them, so we could build our own version of them. Because when they looked like they were going out of sale, I bought a load of them. So I've got a lot of blanks, and I've got some that are scribbled out for specific campaigns and so on. But they're really handy things. There are also ones on some online ones, some online tools for registering your game sessions and so on. Things like if you can save the chat logs and stuff for things like Roll20. Yeah, there's just so many different ways you can do it. Even a Google document or something to just write things down as you go would work out if you've got laptops or tablets or whatever at the table. Anything that you can note some stuff down into so that you don't forget it, and you can incorporate them back into your world notes, your gaming notes, after the fact. So yeah, a good campaign journal. Oh, going back to Square Hex, these this is another thing that they do. It's a simple notebook, but they've got hex squares, squares. So you can use them in any which way that you like, really. Sort of scribble notes down and stuff like that. And there is another version that's got lined, and I use these a lot as well. There's another stock up there. So I tend to give players one of these for their own notes, as well as keeping them on a per campaign thing for my own notes. So anything that you can write down, scribble stuff down as you're going. Going on from a campaign journal, we're getting to a campaign organizer. So if you've created cities and languages and your pubs and all of the other material for your setting, and the notes that you've taken during play in your campaign journal and off the wall when you've woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning going, all of that kind of stuff needs to be organised and documented properly somewhere to, let's say, become truly canon within your world setting. And the way you do that, the way I do that, is via a campaign organizer. Now I use two. Again, there are lots of different things out there, lots of available tools. Again, comment the ones that you use down here. Let's make this a broader thing than just me sort of saying the stuff. Get involved and write what you use down in the comments, and then we can all discover tools and things that we've maybe not used or come across before. But this is my master Bible, copy of my favourite city from my setting, my own world on the back. But in here I've got everything from every iteration of my world. So there's maps that I drew back in 2003. There's a draft from, when's that from? Not sure. There's some missing date. There must be a date on it somewhere. I'm a bit daft about dates. Oh, maybe there isn't. But 2000. There you go. So that's from 2000. There is this poor abused document. That's from way back. Probably mid 80s to early 80s, something like that. I think it's probably the third iteration. Then some bits and pieces on more stuff. I think that's from late 90s, mid to late 90s. A ton of different maps. What else have we got in there? Yeah, so little tiny maps of various places. It's all just kept safely. I mean, the original iteration that I drew when I was, I don't know, 8 or something, is I've laminated it so that it's not in here. It's separate because it's not canon, if you like, anymore. But I've laminated it for further use. But there's all sorts of stuff in here. There's some digital stuff. There's some hand drawn stuff. There's some more notes from all this from 1994. So there's lots of stuff that's been written up in here, and this forms my primary Bible to my world, of which the various maps and stuff that I've got in the books, those Albatross books form the cartographical Bible, if you like. This forms the text Bible, even though there's maps in there as well. Some of the maps in here are no longer canon, but there you go. So that compiled with the ongoing journal, with the maps and with the various of these and other things, that forms the sort of the full canon to my world. Now, another thing that I use is RPG Realmworks, and it's been a slow process in transferring a lot of the various bits and pieces that I've got into Realmworks. But it's a useful tool because there's two aspects to Realmworks. There's the DMs thing, which is a local database you can just complete and fill all the things in you need. It has a sharing thing, so you can identify which bits of the information you put in there are available to players. There's a sort of fog of war type thing where you can slowly reveal maps, portions of maps to players. And there's the subscription version of it gives you some cloud space to store your campaigns and share it with players that also have Realmworks accounts and so on. So again, that's one tool of many of its ilk out there. I like Realmworks because I like their character generation software, which I'm trying to think of off the top of my head. which I somehow can't. Hero Lab. There you go. Hero Lab. I was going to look it up, but now I've remembered. So yeah, so the guys that do Realmworks also do Hero Lab. I'll put links again into the descriptions because they're just really useful tools, and there is an integration between Realmworks and Hero Lab that is really handy to get into. You can call Hero Lab directly from Realmworks, create characters in Hero Lab and reference those characters back within Realmworks. So you've got a direct reference to statistics as well as the names and general descriptions of them. Right, so a campaign organizer is absolutely essential for you as a Bible, a go-to Bible for your setting when when you're creating stuff, when you're creating new stuff, when you're writing adventures. So you know who. Don't think that your campaign Bible should also be static. I mean, like I've showed you there's notes going back all the way, and some of those notes take precedent over other notes because they're further down the line in as far as history goes. So you get an ongoing list of rulers as rulers come and go. So yeah, it'll make your setting dynamic. So don't be frightened just because you've scribbled it down or maybe typed it up neatly in a word processor or anything like that. Don't think it is absolutely sacred. It's your Bible to reference, but it's also your Bible to change as and when you need it to change, and to just record things that have happened that have changed the material, canon altering events and stuff like that. So really useful things to do, to have on hand. So in conclusion, I mean, those are just some of the tools that I use when I'm putting campaign settings together, or when I'm actually doing all the stuff behind the scenes before you actually get to a table. I mean, there's all sorts of other silly things like, these are really handy for measuring out inches or whatever, just they just happen to be sitting on the shelf there. So along with another referee tool is using the cheapest bases ever in the world. There you go, 2p pieces, and nice, better weight than the plastic ones from wherever that cost more. Those ones cost you 2p and nice weight to them. Anyway, rambling. There's lots and lots and lots of different tools. I've just provided a selection here that I find useful at the campaign creation stage. There are other odds and sods that I use, like adventure design forms, a number of other mapping type things. I love maps. Like I am a scout leader, and one of my passions within scouting is navigation and cartography and orienteering. So and hiking. So it's it ties. This is where hobbies start to mingle and merge, and stuff you've learned from one hobby can enhance your passion plays for other hobbies or whatever. There's just lots of areas where things can complement each other. So there. Refereeing isn't an easy job, but it can be a fun job, and it's one that teaches you a lot. It's one that, if you're organised, can be an absolute joy. If you're not organised, can be an absolute nightmare. If you go out to try and create a campaign setting, try and do so in a way that will immerse you in the creation process and your players as they play through it. So make it an interesting experience. Make it feel like it's a new world that they're delving into, rather than just yet another pseudo fantasy patchwork of real world cultures. I think that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you've learned something. Definitely in the comments teach me stuff, because this is a subject that you can just carry on learning throughout your gaming career. I mean, the tools that I use now are not necessarily the tools that I used when I first started. I'm a campaign cartographer, obviously didn't exist when I first started playing. Most digital mapping things didn't. Certainly large scale hex maps and stuff, we got them from Judges Guild, but they weren't really easy to get hold of. Yeah, so things evolve over time, and there's no reason why you can't take a look at what other people are doing, and I enjoy that as well. Take a look at, I would rather, instead of someone turning around to me and say, look, I've got this character that does this and does this and does this, because from my perspective that's pretty boring. But if you came up to me and say, I use this particular tool for running and creating my campaigns, and this is why I use it, and these are its features that I find most useful, then I find that interesting. I find that really interesting, because I can then look at that and go, right, okay, those features you talked about, are they available in the stuff that I use now? If they're not available in the stuff I use now, is it worth going to look at this other tool? How much use will I get out of those features? Are they going to be worthwhile to what I'm doing? Can they enhance the creation process and my behind the scenes refereeing stuff? And you only do that by sharing this kind of stuff, and that's the purpose of this video. Here's a selection of the stuff that I use, and yeah, have it. Go back into the comments of this video and share with me your tools, your favourite odds and sods, things that have given you advice about refereeing that you really have found invaluable, stuff that you find great for your own mapping, like, you know, other mapping software, or maybe there's another company out there that does some mapping sheets of one form or another that you really love, or whatever, anything like that, tell me about it. I'm really interested to know. It is a bit of a passion for it. The behind the scenes refereeing stuff for me is part of the major joy I get out of role-playing games. So that's it for this video. Like, share, there'll be some buttons somewhere, all of that kind of stuff. If you've enjoyed it and you want to find more of similar content to this, we'll be continuing on with our history of various games. Some of those are getting up to speed now, up to near the modern day. There's some that are verging on that, some that are not so far ahead in our little histories. Someone suggested that I do one on Vampire, and that one is coming. Vampire is one of my favourite games from back in the 90s, and still not so much as used to, but still play it every now and again now. So yeah, I think that's about it. There's just stuff coming, more music as well for the 40 of you that enjoy that side of things. But you know, that's another one of my passions. And yeah, I will see you in the next video, whenever that shows up. Ta-ra for now.